The rain hammered the stained glass windows of street. Patrick's cathedral-like accusations from the sky. Each drop a reminder that even heaven mourned Victor Hale's passing. Alexander stood at the altar, his black suit clinging damply to his frame. The weight of 1,000 whispering judgments pressing harder than the mahogany casket before him. In that moment, as Victor's estranged family shot daggers from the pews, Alexander felt the fracture lines of their 25-year love story crack open wide until the lawyer's voice cut through the storm, reading words that would shatter every lie they'd ever hurled at him. Alexander had always known this day would come, not with the precision of a clock, but with the inevitability of a tide pulling back to reveal the scars beneath. Victor, his rock, his storm, his everything, lay still now. The man whose laughter once filled their Brooklyn brownstone with the warmth of forgotten summers. But as the organ's final dirge faded, Alexander's mind didn't linger on the polished eulogies from Victor's corporate cronies. No, it raced backward, to the boy he'd been at 20, wide-eyed and broke in the shadow of the Manhattan skyline, chasing dreams that felt as fragile as the autumn leaves crunching under his worn sneakers. It was 1995, and New York pulsed with a gritty defiance that mirrored Alexander's own restless heart. He'd arrived from a dusty Ohio town 2 years prior. A lanky 20-year-old with a backpack stuffed with dog-eared poetry books and a secret that burned hotter than the subway grates in July. Alexander had known it since he was 12, stealing glances at the quarterback during gym class, his stomach twisting with a fear he couldn't name. In Ohio, that truth had been a cage, barbed with his father's Bible-thumping sermons and his mother's silent tears over his face. So he fled to the city that promised reinvention, landing a barista gig at a West Village coffee shop where the air smelled of espresso and unspoken longings. That's where Victor first appeared, not as the silver-haired titan he would become, but as a 37-year-old architect nursing a black coffee and sketching blueprints on a napkin. Tall, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and eyes like the Hudson on a stormy day. Victor exuded the kind of quiet confidence that made Alexander's hands tremble as he handed over the cup. "Keep the change," Victor said, his voice a low rumble that lingered like smoke, slipping a 20 into the tip jar with a wink that sent heat flooding Alexander's cheeks. It wasn't flirtation not yet, but in the code of stolen glances that gay men in the 90s mastered out of necessity. It was a spark. Weeks turned to months, and Victor became a fixture, his visits stretching from quick coffees to lingering afternoons where he'd coax stories from Alexander like threads from a loom. Alexander spilled it all, the suffocating small-town nights. The first fumbling kiss behind a high school bleacher that ended in a black eye from a bully's fist. The gnawing ache of loving in silence. Victor listened, not with pity, but with the steady gaze of someone who'd walked similar shadowed paths. "I came out in the 70s. Victor confessed one rainy evening, as thunder rattled the shop's windows. Stonewall was my baptism. Lost friends. Family hell. Half my dignity. But it taught me this: love isn't a luxury. Alex, it's survival." That confession cracked Alexander open. For the first time, he felt seen not as a phase or a problem, but as a man deserving of the world's sharp edges and soft corners. Their first real date was a tentative dance, a walk through Washington Square Park, hands brushing accidentally on purpose, hearts pounding to the rhythm of buskers' guitars. When Victor finally kissed him under the arch, the world blurred into a haze of rain-slicked cobblestones and possibility. It was messy, urgent, born of years of restraint. But in Victor's arms, Alexander tasted freedom, flavor as intoxicating as the city's endless nights. Yet love in the AIDS-ravaged 90s was no fairy tale. It was a battlefield. Alexander watched friends waste away in cramped apartments, their lovers barred from hospital rooms by families who arrived too late with crocodile tears. Victor, who'd buried too many, became Alexander's anchor, dragging him to act up meetings where fists raised against indifference forged unbreakable bonds. "We're not just fighting for pills," Victor would say, his voice fierce over protest chants. "We're fighting for the right to love without apology." Alexander, once timid, found his voice there, marching with a sign that read, "Silence equals death," his Ohio drawl sharpening into a roar of defiance. By 1998, their lives intertwined like the roots of an old oak. Victor's architecture firm was booming, commissions pouring in for sleek condos that dotted the skyline, while Alexander, now 23, parlayed his barista charm into a role at a nonprofit aiding queer youth. Their shared apartment in Chelsea became a sanctuary, exposed brick walls lined with Victor's blueprints and Alexander's journals. A king-sized bed where whispered dreams drowned out the sirens below. But shadows lingered. Victor's family, waspy relics from Connecticut, viewed Alexander as a phase, a youthful indiscretion their golden boy would outgrow. Holiday dinners were minefield subtle barbs about settling down properly, eyes sliding past Alexander like he was furniture. The turning point came in 2000, when Victor proposed not with a ring, but with a key to a plot of land upstate, a wild meadow he'd bought for them to build a future on. "Marry me, Alex," he said, kneeling in the grass, his architect's hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. "Not legally, not yet, but in every way that matters." Alexander, tears blurring the wildflowers, said yes, sealing it with a kiss that tasted of earth and eternity. They built a cabin there, weekends hammering nails and laughter, a testament to hands joined in creation. But life, that cruel architect, had blueprints of its own. In 2003, Victor's diagnosis hit like a wrecking ball: pancreatic cancer. Aggressive and unforgiving. The doctors gave him months. Victor fought for years, his body a canvas of scars from chemo and surgeries. Alexander at his side through every sterile hallway. "You're my miracle," Victor would murmur in the dim hospital light, fingers tracing Alexander's knuckles. Alexander became nurse, advocate, lover sleeping in vinyl chairs, battling insurance denials with a ferocity born of terror. He quit his job to care for Victor full-time, their savings draining like sand through fingers. But love, he learned, was the ultimate currency. Through it all, Victor's family circled like vultures, whispering that Alexander was milking the situation, an opportunist clinging to Victor's wealth. "He's too young," his sister sneered at one family gathering, her voice laced with venom. "What does a 28-year-old want with a dying man?" Alexander swallowed the hurt, focusing on Victor's frail smile, the way he'd squeeze his hand and whisper, "They're blind, love, but I see you." By 2005, as Victor rallied for one last remission, they seized stolen joys, road trips along the Pacific Coast Highway, where the ocean's roar drowned doubts, or quiet evenings in their cabin, stargazing from the porch swing. Alexander chronicled it all in letters, tucked into a cedar box: confessions of fear, gratitude, the bone-deep love that reshaped him from fragile boy to steadfast man. "You've given me a life I never dreamed," he wrote one night, Victor asleep beside him, the moon silvering his hair. The cancer returned in 2008, fiercer, claiming ground inch by inch. Alexander watched the man who once sketched empires now sketch shaky hearts on napkins, his blueprint hands too weak to hold a pencil steady. "Promise me," Victor gasped during a lucid spell, "you'll keep fighting for us, for the kids we never had, but mentored in spirit." Alexander nodded, throat tight, vowing silently to honor that legacy. As Victor faded, their world shrank to a hospice bed in the brownstone, monitors beeping like a dirge. Alexander read to him from their favorite Whitman, Verses of body electric and vastness. Until Victor's breaths grew shallow. I love you, Victor whispered on his last dawn, eyes locking with Alexander's in a gaze that spanned lifetimes. Then silencia void that swallowed Alexander whole. Back in the cathedral. 6 months later. The whispers crescendoed as the casket lowered. Gold digger, hissed Victor's nephew from the front row, loud enough for the mourners to titter. He married for the money. Poor Uncle Vic never saw it coming. Alexander's chest tightened, the hook of grief twisting deeper. He'd borne their scorn for years. But this, on sacred ground. The lawyer, a stern woman named Elena who drafted Victor's will in secret sessions, cleared her throat. To my beloved Alexander, she read, voice steady amid the gasps, who gave everything his youth, his health, his very soul to sustain me through darkness. Not for fortune, but for love. I leave you nothing of material worth, for you taught me true wealth lies in sacrifice. Instead, to you, Alex, I entrust the Hale Foundation, expanded tenfold by the assets you've quietly donated over the years to queer youth programs, AIDS research, and family reconciliations you orchestrated in my name. You, who they called taker, were always the giver. The world now knows. The cathedral fell silent, rain softening to a hush. Alexander's tears fell unchecked, not of sorrow, but releasing a testament to the man Victor had helped him become. In that moment, the whispers died, replaced by the echo of truth, love, in its rawest form, always reveals the gold within. The revelation hung in the air like incense, thick and sacred, as faces turned first in shock, then in dawning shame. Victor's sister, Evelyn, clutched her pearls, her lips parting in a silent "oh," while the nephew shrank into his seat, color draining from his cheeks. Alexander didn't meet their eyes. He couldn't. His gaze fixed on the casket, on the lilies wilting slightly in the humid air, symbols of purity now tangled with the mess of human frailty. 25 years. Reduced to this, a will that peeled back layers of misunderstanding to expose the heart beneath. But as the mourners filed out into the drizzle-slicked Fifth Avenue, murmuring apologies that tasted like ash, Alexander lingered. He traced the engraved plaque Victor Elias Hale, 1958 to 2023, beloved architect of dreams, and whispered the words he'd held back at the end. You always knew, didn't you, that I'd give it all again. The cathedral's vastness swallowed his voice, but in his chest, a quiet fire reignited. Victor hadn't just left him a legacy. He'd handed him a map to continue building. Walking home through the canyons of Manhattan, the city that had cradled their love now felt like an old friend. Worn but faithful. Alexander's steps echoed on the wet pavement, each one carrying him further from the boy who'd arrived terrified and alone. Ohio seemed a lifetime ago, that stifling town where faggot was both slur and self-doubt, whispered in locker rooms and echoed in his father's disappointed sighs. Here, in the sprawl of New York, he'd learned to stand tall, shoulders squared against the wind. Their brownstone waited on a tree-lined street in Brooklyn Heights, its red door a beacon amid the uniformity of row houses. Inside, the air still held Victor's Sensitor cologne mingled with the faint must of blueprints. Alexander shed his coat, the damp fabric pooling like spilled secrets, and sank onto the leather sofa they'd haggled over at a flea market in 1999. Photos lined the mantel, them at Pride in 97. Rainbow flags whipping like battle standards. A candid from their upstate cabin. Victor midlaugh. Flour dusted from a botched pie attempt. Alexander, younger, eyes alight as Victor draped an arm around him at a gala. He picked up the cedar box from the side table, its wood smooth from years of handling. Inside, the letters hundreds, penned in stolen moments. The first, dated July 15th, 1995, Victor. If this is madness, let me be mad. Your smile today cracked the world open for me. The last, from March 2023, as you slip away. Know this, you rebuilt me. Brick by loving brick. I am the house you dreamed. Reading them now, Alexander's fingers trembled, not from grief's fresh cut, but from the profound ache of gratitude. Victor had seen his worth when he couldn't, had loved him through the AIDS crisis's terror, when every cough was a specter, every headline a harbinger. Flashback to 1996, their first Christmas together. Alexander, 21 and scraping by on tips, had splurged on a tiny tree, its branches drooping under handmade ornaments. Victor arrived with armfuls of takeout from a dim sum spot, but it was his gift, a leather-bound journal embossed with "To My Muse," that undid Alexander. Write your truths, Victor said, pulling him close by the fire escape's glow. That night, as snow dusted the fire escape, they made love for the first time, slow and reverent, bodies mapping unfamiliar terrain with the tenderness of explorers. It wasn't just passion. It was permission to exist, to desire, to belong. But belonging came at a cost. Victor's world was one of boardrooms and benefactors, where queerness was tolerated in whispers but not shouted from rooftops. At a 1997 firm holiday party, Alexander stood awkwardly in a borrowed suit, sipping champagne while executives eyed him like an exotic pet. Victor's little protege, one slurred, clapping Alexander's shoulder too hard. Victor, sensing the shift, whisked him to the balcony. The city lights a glittering apology. They're relics, he growled. But Alexander saw the flicker of old wounds, rejection from his own father, who'd disowned him post-Stonewall. In that shared vulnerability, their bond deepened, two survivors forging armor from scars. By 2001, as the towers fell and ash blanketed the streets, their love became a bulwark against chaos. Alexander volunteered at Ground Zero relief centers, handing out water to soot-streaked firefighters, while Victor designed pro bono memorial simple granite slabs etched with names, a quiet defiance against oblivion. In the aftermath, they clung tighter, hosting potlucks for affected friends. Laughter a rebellion. We rebuild, Victor would say, sketching over dinner, Alexander's head on his shoulder. It was then Alexander proposed expanding their nonprofit work, funneling Victor's bonuses into scholarships for queer kids fleeing Bible Belt towns like his own. Victor agreed, eyes shining. That's my Alex turning pain to purpose. The cancer's shadow first loomed in 2003, a routine checkup turning nightmare. Alexander remembered the doctor's face, clinical mask cracking with pity. Stage 3. The word hung like a guillotine. Victor, ever the stoic, joked about redesigning Hell's Gates. But alone in the car, he broke, sobbing into Alexander's shirt. I can't leave you, he choked. Alexander, 28 and terrified, became the pillar. He researched trials, navigated bureaucracy, held Victor through nights of nausea that left him curled like a question mark. Their cabin became a refuge, weekends of fresh air and mock picnics, where Victor's laughter, though weaker, still lit the woods. Through 2004's grueling treatments, Alexander's world narrowed to beeps and bandages. He sold his vintage guitar collection to cover copays, worked odd jobs freelance writing for queer magazines, tutoring poetry at community centers. Friends marveled at his resilience. But inside, doubt gnawed, was he enough? One evening, post-chemo, Victor pulled him down, voice raspy. You are my foundation, Alex. Without you, I'd crumble. Those words anchored him, transforming fear to fierce devotion. Remission in 2005 brought a fragile bloom. They traveled Amtrak to Provincetown, where drag shows and dunes reminded them of joy's persistence. Alexander, now 30, published his first chapbook of poems, dedicated to Victor, to the man who drew me home. Sales funded their first real donation, $10,000 to an AIDS hospice. Anonymous. Victor insisting, "Let it be our secret," he said. Givers don't need applause. But 2006 whispered warning scans showing spots, like ink blots on Victor's future. Alexander's resolve hardened. He advocated for experimental therapies, flying to conferences, networking with activists. Victor's family intruded then, Evelyn arriving with casseroles and condescension. "You should rest, dear," she cooed. But her eyes accused, "You're exhausting him." Alexander bit back retorts, focusing on Victor's needs. But the barbs accumulated, eroding his spirit like acid rain. In 2007, as Victor stabilized again, they pursued legal protections wills, powers of attorney amid California's brief marriage equality window. Though not residents, they honeymooned there, rings exchanged on a foggy beach, vows whispered against crashing waves. Till death, Alexander promised, meaning it deeper than words. Back home, they mentored a runaway teen, Jamie, providing a couch and counseling, watching him bloom into confidence. "Your family now?" Victor told the boy, and Alexander's heart swelled, proof their love rippled outward. The decline accelerated in 2009, Victor's frame thinning to bone and will. Alexander, 34, became invisible to the world, his days a blur of meds and meals. Sleepless nights found him journaling by lamplight. "Love is the quiet work emptying yourself so another may fill." Victor, sensing his strain, urged therapy. "Don't lose yourself in me," he pleaded. Alexander went, unpacking Ohio ghosts, emerging stronger, his poetry turning from lament to anthem. By 2010, hospice loomed, their brownstone, transformed hospital bed in the living room, overlooking the garden they'd planted together. Friends rotated vigils, sharing stories of Victor's kindnesses, the anonymous scholarships, the pro bono designs for shelters. Alexander read aloud from their letters, Victor's eyes fluttering in recognition. "My greatest design," he murmured once, hand on Alexander's cheek. The end came gently. April 15th, 2023. Alexander held him as breath slowed, the room filled with spring's tentative light. "Thank you." Victor sighed, gone before the echo faded. Alexander wailed then. Primal. The dam breaking after years of holding. Now, months later, the will's truth echoed in empty rooms. Alexander rose, box in hand, and began sorting donating clothes to shelters, framing blueprints for the foundation. Evelyn called the next day. Voice small, "I was wrong. Forgive me." He did. Not for her, but for Victor's dream of mended bridges. The journey hadn't ended. It evolved. Alexander stepping into light, carrying their love like a blueprint for tomorrow. Dawn crept through the brownstone's lace curtains, painting the walls in hues of rose and regret. As Alexander stirred from a sleep fractured by dreams of Victor's voice low, insistent, urging him onward. The foundation's paperwork sprawled across the kitchen table like a half-finished puzzle. Ledgers showing the quiet empire he'd built in shadows. Millions redirected not to luxury, but to lifelines for those like the boy he'd been. A knock shattered the quiet Jamie, now 22 and studying architecture at Pratt. His backpack slung low, eyes wide with the news. "Alex, it's everywhere, the papers. Online. They called you a saint." Alexander pulled him into a hug. The young man's frame solid now. No longer the scared kid they'd rescued from an abusive home in 2007. "Not a saint," he murmured, Voice rough from disuse. Just a man who loved. Over coffee black. Like Victor S. Jamie scrolled his phone. Headlines blazing. Hale Air's secret sacrifices unveiled. Gold digger myth shattered. Comments poured in. A tide of support washing over old wounds. This is what real love looks like. Proud queer uncle here, thank you. Alexander. But amid the praise, stragglers, still suspicious. Where's the proof? Proof. Alexander's laugh was bitter, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. He'd spent decades providing it in actions, not fanfare. Back to 2011, when Victor's health plateaued into a tense truce. Alexander, 36, balanced foundation duties with caregiving, commuting to meetings in a battered Subaru. Victor napping in the passenger seat. One afternoon, post-a-donor luncheon, they picnicked in Central Park, blankets spread under the Bethesda fountain. Sandwiches from Zabbers. Victor, gaunt but grinning, fed Alexander a grape. Remember our first park walk? He asked. Alexander did the brush of hands. The electric fear. You've come so far, Victor said, pride softening his features. That year, marriage equality swept New York, and they wed in a quiet ceremony at City Hall. Rings, simple gold bands engraved with coordinates of their cabin meadow. Friends toasted in the brownstone. Jamie is best man. Toasting to architects of the heart. Legally bound now. Alexander felt the shift to security net against the family's disdain. Evelyn attended, stiff in Chanel, but her hug at the end lingered. He's lucky, she admitted. A crack in the facade. 2012 brought expansion. The Hale Foundation launched Blueprints for Tomorrow. Scholarships for LGBTQ plus youth pursuing creative fields. Alexander poured himself into it, interviewing applicants in coffee shops, seeing echoes of his 20-year-old self in their trembling voices. One girl, Mia, 17, from rural Pennsylvania, clutched her portfolio like a shield. They say I'm confused, she whispered. Alexander shared his Ohio story. Victor's lessons. Confusion is the clay. Shape it. She got the grant. Later emailing photos of her first exhibition, vibrant abstracts screaming freedom. Victor's relapses grew frequent. Each a gut punch. In 13, a hospital stay for pneumonia left him bedridden for months. Alexander, 38, learned to administer IVs. His hands steady despite the quake inside. Nights blurred into advocacy calls lobbying for better queer elder care. Testifying before city council on discrimination in hospices. My husband lies forgotten because he's gay, he'd say. Voice breaking. Earning allies and enemies. Victor, from his sickbed, reviewed grants via laptop. His input sharp as ever. Fund the fighters, he'd insist. Eyes twinkling. By 2014, as Obergefell legalized marriage nationwide, their union symbolized Moria beacon and shifting tides. They honeymooned belatedly in San Francisco, riding cable cars, holding hands openly, Victor's cane tapping a defiant rhythm. We made it. He breathed atop Twin Peaks, city sprawling below. Alexander teared up, the vista blurring. And we'll keep making it. But 2015 tested that vow. Victor's cancer metastasized to his lungs. Breaths labored like wine through cracked panes. Alexander hired nurses, but refused to relinquish care. Massaging swollen feet. Singing off-key folk tunes to ease pain. The foundation thrived despite events raising millions. Alexander keynoting at galas. His words weaving personal tapestry. Love isn't measured in years, but in the lives it touches. Donors marveled at his poise, unaware of the exhaustion etching lines around his eyes. Jamie's graduation that spring was a bright spot. They attended. Victor in a wheelchair, cheering as the young man crossed the stage. You gave me this. Jamie said later. Diploma in hand. Alexander waved it off. But Victor squeezed his knee. We did. Love. Together. 2016's election cast long shadows. Hate crime spiking. Queer centers vandalized. Alexander channeled rage into action, expanding the foundation's safe houses refuges for trans kids fleeing conversion camps. Inspired by stories from applicants. Victor, weaker now, donated stock shares quietly. Swelling endowments. Build walls of welcome. He advised from his recliner. Oxygen mask fogging his words. Through 2017's relentless chemo cycles, Alexander's poetry sustained him a second collection. Foundations. Dedicated to Victor. Sales funding emergency grants. Readings became rallies. Audiences weeping as he recited Ode to the Caregiver, lines of bone-weary devotion. The beauty in breaking. Critics called it a queer epic of endurance. But for Alexander, it was therapy. Words staunching the bleed. 2018 marked a milestone, the cabin's 20th anniversary. They drove up, nurse in tow, reclaiming the porch with blankets and stars. Victor, frail as autumn leaves, traced constellations. Our forever, he said. Alexander nodded, throat tight, committing the moment to memory the cricket's chorus. Victor's hand warm in his. Decline steepened in 19. Victor's mobility vanished, bedsores mapping his decline. Alexander adapted the brownstone ramps, lifts while managing board meetings via Zoom. His face a mask of calm. Internally, panic clawed. How much longer? Therapy helped, unpacking survivor's guilt before it fully formed. You're grieving the living, his counselor said. Alexander absorbed it, emerging with resolve. Cherish the now. 2020's pandemic isolated them further. But technology bridged gaps. Virtual foundation galas. Jamie's video calls from grad school. Victor, immunocompromised, became a hermit. Alexander, his world. They baked bread, watched old movies. Victor critiquing plot holes with ghostly wit. Like our life, he'd quip, full of twists. But the ending's ours. As vaccines rolled out in 21, hope flickered. Victor rallied enough for a foundation retreat upstate. Cabins echoing their own. He spoke briefly. Voice amplified. Gratitude to Alex, my co-architect. Attendees applauded. Alexander blushed. The moment a bomb. But 2022 brought Finality Hospice full-time. Morphine dulling edges. Alexander read daily, letters. News of grantees thriving Mia's gallery show. Jamie's first commission. See, he'd say. Our blueprint lives. Victor smiled faintly, whispering thanks. In the will's aftermath, Alexander honored it by expanding new programs for queer elders. Named Victor's Vision. Evelyn volunteered. Redemption in her tentative smiles. Jamie moved in temporarily, their bond a bridge to future. Alexander stood now, gazing at the garden, shears in hand. Pruning roses. Victor's favorite. She felt the cycle, cut to grow. The story wasn't over. It bloomed anew, roots deep in sacrifice. Petals of legacy unfurling towards sun. The garden's earth yielded softly under Alexander's spade, rich with the promise of renewal. As he planted bulbs Victor had chosen years ago, tulips for hope, their reds fierce as a lover's blush. Neighbors paused on their morning walks, offering nods that had once been furtive, now warm with the will's viral glow. Heard about Victor? An older woman said, clutching her poodle's leash. What a man you are. Alexander murmured thanks. But inside, the words landed like rain on parched soil, nourishing, yet unable to erase the drought of loss. He retreated indoors. The brownstones creaks a familiar symphony, and opened his laptop to the foundation's dashboard. Applications flooded in, Stories of trans teens in Texas. Gay elders in Florida nursing homes. Their pleas echoing his own silenced youth. One email stopped him cold from Mia, now 25, attaching photos of her mural in a Brooklyn youth center, funded by their grant. Because of you and Victor, I painted my truth, she wrote. Alexander's fingers hovered over keys. Response forming, you painted ours too. Memory tugged him back to 1999, a year of fragile foundations. At 24, Alexander juggled classes at N1 courses in literature. Victor footing tuition with quiet insistence. Invest in you, he'd say, waving off protests. Their life was a rhythm of late-night study sessions. Victor sketching beside Alexander's highlighted pages. Debates over Frost versus Whitman fueling midnight coffees. It was domestic bliss laced with perilous specter of raids on gay bars. A friend's overdose from shame-fueled despair. That summer, they adopted a rescue dog. A scruffy mutt named Blueprints Blue, for short, whose wagging tail became therapy. Walks in Prospect Park evolved into therapy sessions. Alexander venting family estrangements. Call your mother, Victor urged one dusk. Leaves gold overhead. Alexander did. Voice cracking over the line, Mom, I'm happy. With a man. Love me anyway. Silence stretched. Then a sob. Always did. Baby. Forgiveness bloomed tentative. Letters exchanged. A bridge half built. 2002 tested it. Victor's firm hit a boom. Skyscrapers rising like monuments to ambition. But stress manifested in ulcers. Migraines. Alexander, 27. Played nurse preemptively herbal teas. Massages under starlit roofs. When a rival architect outed Victor in a smear campaign, Hale's distractions, boys over buildings, scandal erupted. Victor weathered it with lawsuits and silence. But Alexander seethed. Penning anonymous op-eds on queer erasure in corporate America. You're my warrior, Victor said, pulling him close after the dust settled. Their body's a fortress. The diagnosis in '03 shattered that peace. Alexander remembered the ER's fluorescent buzz. Victor's hand clammy in his. We'll fight, he vowed. Mind racing to plans, diets. Specialists. Support groups. Friends rallied. Potlucks with vegan casseroles. Prayer circles from unlikely allies. Evelyn visited once. Bearing fruit baskets and frost. Is this permanent? Victor's laugh was weak. More permanent than your judgments. Sis. She left chastened. Seeds of change sown. 2004's treatments were a gauntlet radiation, leaving Victor a ghost. Alexander force-feeding shakes. Singing through tears. He documented it in a private blog. Later compiled into Caregiver's Codex. A foundation resource. Love is logistics, he wrote. And liturgy. Victor read drafts aloud. His critique gentle, more heart, less head. It saved Alexander, turning chaos to craft. Remission's joy in '05 was electric. They threw a Phoenix party. Balloons and cake. Guests toasting survival. Alexander, 30, proposed a foundation arm for cancer support in queer communities. Victor seeding it with bonuses. Our legacy starts here, he said, clinking glasses. 2000 SIXS spots returned like uninvited guests. Alexander, 31, dove deeper into advocacy, co-founding a queer health coalition, lobbying Albany for inclusive care. Victor attended meetings virtually. His input gold. Family dynamics shifted. Evelyn's calls warmed, inviting them to Connecticut for neutral ground. Dinners there were awkward ballets. Victor's nephew, young Tom, staring at Alexander with curiosity, not contempt. Uncle Vic says you're a poet. The boy ventured. Alexander recited a verse, planting wonder. 2007's marriage in California was a dream deferred realized. Vows on the beach, in storms and sun. I choose you. Back east. They hosted a reception in the cabin. Wildflowers and wine. Jamie arrived then. 14 and runaway. Found sleeping in a park. Reminds me of you. Victor said, offering the couch. Alexander mentored him poetry slams. Art classes watching walls crumble. 2008's metastasis brought darkness. Alexander, 33, quit writing gigs for full-time care. Funding from Victor's trust. Nights were vigils. Days battles with pain management. You're fading, he whispered once. Panic raw. Victor cupped his face, but our light endures. Therapy unpacked Alexander's codependency. Teaching boundaries date nights with friends. Solo walks to breathe. 2009's hospice prep was pragmatic heartbreak. They toured facilities. Chose home. Alexander trained with nurses. His touch tender as prayer. The foundation hit stride first, blueprints, gala raising $500K. Alexander emceeing. Voice steady. For every hand held in shadow. 2010 stability allowed trips, Niagara Falls. Mist veiling their awe. Victor, in wheelchair, marveled, nature's grand design. Alexander captured it in sketches. His poet's eye turning visual. 2011's pneumonia scare hospitalized Victor for weeks. Alexander camped in the room, reading bedside Harry Potter marathons for levity. Discharge brought home rituals, soup simmers. Story swaps. Evelyn visited more, bringing Tom's drawings inspired by Alexander's tales. 2012's wedding at City Hall was intimate magic. Rings exchanged. Papers signed. Joy sealed. Party after, drag queens and disco. Victor dancing slow from his chair. 2013's Lung Mets slowed Victor to whispers. Alexander amplified with microphones for board calls. His advocacy fires her testimony on Capitol Hill for marriage rights. My husband's life hangs on equity, he declared. 2014's San Francisco honeymoon, cable cars and cuddles. Victor's cane scepter. Our empire, he joked. Overlooking Bay. 2015 spread to bones immobilized him. Alexander installed lifts. His muscles aching but spirit unbowed. Poetry collection launch, sold out. Tears flowing as he thanked Victor on stage via video. 2016's election night, they huddled. TV flickering doom. Hate rises. Alexander fretted. Victor, so do we. Foundation pivoted to crisis funds. 2017's Chemo Redux, Alexander's Codex, published. Royalties to care. Readings cathartic. Audiences hugging him post-show. 2018's Cabin Anniversary, Stars and Stories. Victor's voice a thread. 2019's Bedsores Battle, Alexander's Hands, Salve, and Soul. 2020's Lockdown, Baking. Movies. Unbreakable Closeness. 2021's Retreat, Victor's Speech. A Whisper Roar. 2022's Morphine Haze, Letters Read. Legacies launched. Now, in the garden's bloom. Alexander emailed Mia back. Then turned to Jamie. Ready to build. The boy nodded. Eyes alight. Their story, woven with Victor's, threaded forward sacrifice to strength. Love's endless architecture. Sunlight slanted through the brownstone's bay window, gilding the Foundation's latest annual report on the Tablia 200-page testament to resilience. Charts climbing like ivy on a trellis. Alexander traced the numbers. Each digit a story, scholarships awarded. Safe beds filled. Lives redirected from despair's cliff. A call buzzed CNN, requesting an interview. Your tales inspiring the nation. The producer gushed. Alexander declined politely. Spotlights had never been his stage. Victor's had been enough for both. Instead, He laced up sneakers for a run along the promenade. Brooklyn Heights waterfront path where they'd strolled hand in hand, debating life's blueprints. The East River churned below, ferries slicing waves, a metaphor for their journey turbulent yet directed. At 45, Alexander's body bore marks of care, faint scars from lifting Victor, eyes shadowed by vigils. But his stride was sure, heart a steady drum. Memory crested like a swell, pulling him to 1994 pre-Victor, the raw edge of arrival. At 19, fresh from Ohio's cornfields, New York assaulted with honks and hustle. He crashed on a cousin's couch in Queens, job hunting with resumes crumpled in his fist. The coffee shop interview. Can you handle the rush? The manager barked. Alexander nodded, masking terror. And Dove and steaming milk. Memorizing orders. Tips his lifeline.
It didn't have to end this way.